On a stormy night, a powerful CEO found a barefoot little girl shivering at a bus stop. She whispered, "My mom is dying." One choice later, his fortune meant nothing because staying changed 3 lives forever. The storm didn't arrive politely. It slammed into Chicago like it had a grievance. From the back seat of his black town car, Riker Ashford, 36, watched rain smear the skyline into something unrecognizable. Neon signs stretched and bled across the glass. The windshield wipers moved fast, desperate failing. Even machines had limits. "Take the long way," Riker said quietly. The driver nodded without asking why. No one ever asked Riker why, not anymore. October 31st, Halloween. Children laughed behind masks. Adults pretended fear was fun. But Riker's body remembered this night without costumes or candy. He didn't mark the date. He didn't speak it. Yet every year, when the air sharpened and the rain turned cruel, something inside him reopened. This was the night his younger sister died. The car crept along the river road. Riker folded his arms, staring at the rain streaking down the window like veins. Even the sky can't hold itself together tonight, he thought. The idea arrived uninvited, brushing against memories he'd locked away with success and silence. Outwardly, he was control itself, tailored coat, composed posture, a billionaire CEO who turned chaos into profit. Inside, the war never ended. The car slowed at a red light. Reflections of jack-o'-lanterns floated on the pavement, distorted and hollow. Riker exhaled slowly. This was supposed to be a night of forgetting. A drink, a quiet apartment, nothing more. Then something flickered at the edge of his vision. A shape. Too small. Too still. Riker leaned forward. His breath caught. "Stop," he said. The word cut through the rain. The car braked hard at the curb. Rain thundered down loud enough to drown out the city. Beneath a half-broken bus stop awning sat a child. She was curled into herself, knees pulled tight to her chest, wrapped in a threadbare blanket soaked through and clinging like wet paper. Bare feet pressed against the concrete, red, raw, trembling. Her hair a pale mess of light brown curls plastered to her small face. She couldn't have been more than 5. Riker stared, his mind refusing to process what his eyes were seeing. A child alone, at night, in a storm like this. He reached for the door. The driver turned, concern sharp in his voice. "Mr. Ashford, stay," Riker said. He stepped out into the downpour. Rain sliced through his wool coat, instantly soaking him to the bone, but he barely noticed. He opened his umbrella and approached slowly, deliberately, as if one wrong move might cause her to vanish. "Hey," he said gently, raising his voice just enough to be heard over the rain. "Hey there." The girl flinched. Her fingers tightened around the blanket. Her shoulders stiffened. When she looked up, her eyes were wide and dark, filled with a fear far too old for her face. Riker stopped several feet away and lowered himself to one knee, keeping the distance. He remembered being small, remembered how size alone could feel like a threat. "I'm not here to hurt you," he said. "My name's Riker." She said nothing. Rainwater ran down her cheeks, indistinguishable from tears. Or maybe she refused to cry. Some children learned that early. "Are you okay?" he asked softly. The girl shook her head once. That single movement hit harder than any scream. Riker stayed where he was. "I won't come closer," he said carefully, as if negotiating with something fragile and explosive at the same time. "I promise." The girl's eyes flicked to the umbrella, then to the car idling behind him, then back to his face. Her breathing was fast, shallow, like she was bracing for something bad to happen, because experience told her it usually did. "What's your name?" Riker asked. She hesitated. "Marlowe," she whispered. The sound of it nearly vanished into the rain. "Marlowe," he repeated softly, treating it like something sacred. "That's a good name." She didn't respond. Compliments were things adults gave before asking for something. Riker swallowed. Do you have someone I can call your mom, your dad, at the word mom? Marlowe's lower lip trembled. She pulled her knees tighter to her chest, shrinking further into the blanket. I can't, she said. Her voice was barely there. Why not a long pause? Then, in the flattest tone imaginable, like she was reciting a fact instead of a heartbreak, she said, My mom's in the ICU. The words landed heavy. Riker felt his chest tighten. Which hospital? I don't know the name, she said. It's big. White walls. They made me leave when visiting hours ended. Rain soaked through Riker's hair, dripped from his jaw. He didn't wipe it away. You waited out here, he asked. Marlowe nodded once. Why, she looked down at her feet. Because she's all I have. Something cracked inside Riker Ashford, clean, sudden, and irreversible. And for the first time in years, the storm outside wasn't the loudest thing anymore. Riker didn't move closer. He stayed kneeling on the edge of the sidewalk, rain hammering the umbrella like fingers on a drum. Chicago's streetlights turned the puddles into broken mirrors. Marlowe hugged her blanket tight, her eyes locked on him like a trapped animal deciding whether the next motion meant escape or danger. Your mom's in the ICU, Riker repeated, slow, steady, and you don't know the hospital name. She shook her head. How did you get here? Marlowe's throat bobbed as she swallowed. Bus. Then walking. Her voice had that thin, careful sound kids used when they'd learned adults sometimes punished the truth. Riker's jaw clenched. And they made you leave. They said, rules. She stared at the curb, not at him. Family only. But I am family. The sentence came out sharper than he expected, like a tiny blade trying to cut through a world that wouldn't listen. Riker felt something in his chest twist. The kind of twist that didn't come from money or power. The kind that came from helplessness. Okay, he said. You did the right thing. You followed your mom's rules. You stayed near the hospital. You tried. Marlowe didn't soften. Praise didn't change hunger. It didn't change cold. Riker slid his hand into his coat pocket and pulled out the one thing he always had on him, a crisp black business card. He held it between two fingers and set it down on the edge of the bench, far enough that she could see it clearly, close enough that she wouldn't have to stand near him to take it. My name's on that, he said, and a phone number. Marlowe's gaze flicked to the card like it might bite. I'm not asking you to trust me, Riker continued. I'm offering you choices, that's it. The rain made everything sound louder. Cars hissed past. Somewhere distant sirens rose and fell like a warning. I live 10 minutes from here, Riker said. If you want, we can go there. You can get warm, you can dry off. We can call the hospital together and find your mom's room. Marlowe didn't move. Riker nodded once as if he understood. Or he added, we can call from here. I'll stand right there by the curb and you can stay under the awning. I won't touch you. I won't crowd you. The girl's eyes lifted again. They were wet, but it wasn't just rain. It was exhaustion trying not to show itself. My mom said, Marlowe's voice cracked. My mom said strangers take things. Riker felt the sting of that not because it accused him, but because it was true more often than it wasn't. She's right, he said quietly. Your mom's smart. You're smart for listening. Marlowe stared at the card again, then back at him, her face still guarded. Riker lowered his voice softer than the storm. I can also make hot chocolate. Something flickered, almost invisible in her expression. Not trust. Not yet. But need. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The rain filled the silence with violence. Wind tore at the bus stop awning, making it rattle like loose bones. Marlowe's shivering had become a full-body tremor, now the kind you couldn't hide no matter how proud you were. Riker kept his posture low, unthreatening, but his eyes stayed on her bare feet so red they looked burned. You're freezing, he said, voice tight. Marlowe's chin lifted a fraction, defiant even while her teeth chattered. I'm fine. It wasn't a lie. It was a spell. If she said it enough times, maybe the world would believe her. Riker swallowed hard. Marlowe, where were you going to sleep tonight? She blinked slow, like the question itself was unfair. Here, she said. On this bench, she nodded once. Riker's stomach dropped. Images flashed his own childhood porch. Locked door thunder, the smell of wet wood and mildew. The memory rose like a hand around his throat. He forced his voice to stay calm. That's not safe. Marlowe's eyes narrowed. I can't go with you. You don't have to, he said immediately. You don't have to do anything. She stared at the street. The city was still moving around them, indifferent. People in costumes ran from bars to ride shares, laughing, screaming, playfully holding hands. No one looked toward the bus stop. No one noticed the 5-year-old turning blue. Riker felt anger bloom hot, clean, directed at the entire world. Then Marlowe whispered so quietly, Riker almost missed it. She's all alone in there. Riker leaned forward slightly. Your mom? Marlowe nodded. Her voice thinned further, like it might tear. They have machines. They have rules. But she's still alone. Her small fingers tightened around the blanket. And I'm alone out here. The sentence hit Riker harder than any boardroom betrayal. It was raw, unpolished, honest. Riker stood slowly, very slowly, so she wouldn't flinch. He angled the umbrella so the rain stopped striking her face directly. The simple act looked almost ridiculous, a billionaire CEO holding an umbrella over a child, as if that could fix anything. But it mattered. He took a breath. Then let's not be alone anymore, he said. Marlowe didn't move. Riker didn't rush her. He waited, rain dripping off his sleeves, off his hair, off the edge of the umbrella, like time itself falling away. Marlowe's eyes traveled again, umbrella card, car, street, then back to his face. Do you have a lock? She asked suddenly. Riker blinked. A lock on your door, she clarified. My mom says locks are important. Riker's throat tightened. Yes, he said. There's a lock, and cameras, and security. Marlowe swallowed. And you won't tell anyone I'm bad? Riker frowned. You're not bad. She didn't accept it right away. Kids like her rarely did. Finally, she stood. Her blanket slipped off her shoulders, slapping wet pavement. She bent quickly and grabbed it first, protecting herself before letting anyone else help. Riker opened the back door of the car. Marlowe climbed in without a word, and when the door shut, the storm outside suddenly felt farther away. The elevator ride to Riker's penthouse was silent, except for the soft hum of ascent and the faint drip of rainwater from Marlowe's blanket onto the polished floor. Marlowe stood in the corner, small as a shadow, chin, down, eyes forward. She didn't touch anything. She didn't lean against the wall. She held herself like she'd been trained by life to take up as little space as possible. Riker watched her reflection in the mirrored paneling. His own face looked like what the city thought he was: controlled, expensive, unbothered. But his hands were clenched. The doors opened with a soft chime. Riker's home was a cathedral of glass and stone. Floor-to-ceiling windows, minimalist furniture, a skyline view that cost more than most people's entire lives. Everything was perfectly arranged, perfectly clean, like no one truly lived there. Marlowe stepped out and froze. Her eyes darted across the room, wide and wary, as if she'd wandered into a museum she wasn't supposed to be in. The marble floor reflected her tiny bare feet and the dripping edges of her blanket. She left a trail of wet footprints that bloomed dark, then slowly faded as the heat rose from the building. Riker closed the door behind them and set his umbrella in the stand. Make yourself at home, he said, then immediately hated how hollow it sounded. This wasn't a home. It was a fortress. Marlowe didn't move. Okay, Riker corrected softly. You don't have to make yourself anything. Just breathe. He turned on warmer lights. The room shifted from cold white to soft amber, Marlowe's shoulders lowered by a millimeter. Do you want something warm to drink? Riker asked. Hot chocolate. Marlowe nodded once, still not looking fully at him, like eye contact might be a contract she couldn't afford. Riker moved into the kitchen, pulling a mug from a cabinet that rarely got used. He heated milk, stirred cocoa, dropped marshmallows on top. The smell of chocolate spread through the sterile air like a rebellion. He slid the mug across the counter and pulled out a chair, then waited. Marlowe approached slowly. One cautious step, then another. Her blanket dragged behind her like a tail. She sat only after Riker stepped back, giving her space. She wrapped both hands around the mug, holding it like it was heat and permission all at once. She blew softly, then took a tiny sip. Riker's voice dropped. I'm going to find you something dry to wear, okay? You can use the guest bathroom down the hall. Towels are on the shelf. Marlowe's eyes flicked up. You won't lock me in? The question made Riker's stomach twist. No, he said firmly. I won't lock you in, and I won't let anyone take you. Marlowe stared at him for a long beat, measuring the truth. Then she whispered, barely audible, okay. She stood clutching her blanket and patted down the hallway, small footsteps on marble, leaving water behind, like proof she was real. Riker watched until the bathroom door clicked shut. Only then did he exhale. And in the sudden quiet of his perfect fortress, Riker Ashford realized something terrifying. Tonight someone had entered his life, and he didn't want to push her back out. The bathroom door stayed closed longer than Riker expected. At first he told himself it was fine. Hot water took time. Small bodies took longer to warm. Still, the quiet pressed against him in ways his penthouse never had before. He leaned against the kitchen counter, staring at the city through the glass. Rain slid down the windows in long, trembling lines, like the night was bleeding slowly instead of screaming. This wasn't how tonight was supposed to go. He'd planned to pour a drink, sit alone, let the hours pass without touching anything that hurt. Instead, there was a 5-year-old girl in his guest bathroom, wearing borrowed safety like a coat that didn't quite fit. A memory rose without permission. Him, 7 years old, standing barefoot on a porch in a thunderstorm. The door locked, lights on inside. A voice yelling from the couch, slurred and angry. Stop crying, or I'll give you something to cry about. Riker shut his eyes. He hadn't thought about that night in decades. Success had buried it well. Money made good soil for forgetting. But children, real children, had a way of digging up what adults pretended was gone. The bathroom door clicked open. Marlowe stepped out, slowly, wrapped in an oversized white t-shirt that swallowed her frame. The sleeves reached past her elbows. The hem brushed her knees. Her hair was damp, finger-combed back. She clutched her wet clothes against her chest like armor. She looked even smaller now. Riker straightened immediately. Hey, he said gently. You okay? She nodded. He took the bundle from her hands carefully, like she might change her mind. I'll get these dried for you. She watched him disappear into the laundry room, eyes following his every move like she was memorizing exits. When he returned, the hot chocolate mug was still warm in her hands. She'd taken tiny sips, slow and deliberate. You can sit wherever you want, Riker said. She chose the edge of the couch. Not the middle, not the corner. The edge ready to move if needed. Riker sat across from her, not too close, not too far. The clock on the wall ticked louder than usual. Marlowe, he said quietly. You don't have to sleep on the couch tonight. Her shoulders stiffened. I can, I know, he said, but you don't have to. She stared into her mug. Steam fogged her face. Will you still be here in the morning? She asked. The question landed heavy, not dramatic, not pleading, just tired. Riker didn't hesitate this time. Yes. She nodded once like she'd filed the answer somewhere important. And for the first time since he'd met her, she leaned back just slightly against the couch. Riker showed Marlowe the guest room. It was pristine. Gray linens. Too many pillows. A space clearly designed for people who never actually stayed. Marlowe hovered in the doorway, gripping the frame with one small hand, like crossing the threshold required permission she wasn't sure she had. "You don't have to go in yet," Riker said. "We can leave the door open." Her grip loosened. She nodded. He pulled the covers back and placed an extra blanket at the foot of the bed. "You can use as many as you want." Marlowe climbed up carefully, shoes still missing feet tucked beneath her, like she might need to disappear quickly. She wrapped the blanket around her shoulders, chin barely peeking out. Riker stood there awkward, unsure of the exact distance between comfort and intrusion. "I'll be right down the hall," he said. "If you need anything, you can call out. You don't have to be quiet." Her eyes flicked up. "Even if it's late, especially if it's late." She absorbed that. Then asked the question that cracked something open inside him. "People usually leave," she said, "when it's morning." Riker crouched beside the bed, lowering himself to her level, his knees pressed into the carpet. "I'm not leaving," he said, voice steady. "Not tomorrow. Not in the morning." Her eyes searched his face, not for kindness, but for truth. He held her gaze and let the silence do the work. Finally, she nodded and turned onto her side, facing the wall. Her breathing was shallow, at first controlled. Then slowly it softened. Riker stood and took one step back. "Marlowe," she murmured, half asleep. "Yes, if I stay. Maybe Mom will too." The words weren't a request. They were a belief she was afraid to lose. Riker swallowed hard. "I think she knows you're waiting," he said. "And I think that matters." He reached for the door, pulling it closed until it was just barely ajar. The light from the hallway spilled into the room in a thin line, enough to keep the dark from feeling permanent. Riker stood there longer than necessary, listening to her breathing, even out, counting each rise and fall like proof. Then he turned and walked back to his own room. He sat on the edge of his bed, still fully dressed, hands dangling uselessly at his sides. This night was never supposed to happen. But now that it had, he knew one thing with terrifying clarity. He would not survive it by pretending it didn't matter. Morning arrived quietly, not with sunlight, but with a pale gray haze clinging to the city like exhaustion. Rain still tapped softly against the windows, gentler now, as if the storm had said all it needed to say. Riker hadn't slept. He stood in the kitchen with a mug of untouched coffee, staring down the hallway toward the guest room. The door was still slightly open. That mattered. He checked his phone. 8 missed notifications. Calendar alerts stacked like dominoes waiting to fall. A board meeting in 3 time zones. A media interview. Contracts that didn't care about children or hospitals. Riker opened a new message to his assistant. "Postpone everything today. Personal emergency." He hit send. The reply came almost instantly. "Tessa Vale. You never cancel. What's going on?" Riker typed 2 words. "This matters." No explanation. None needed. He walked down the hall and gently tapped the doorframe. Marlowe, she stirred immediately, like she'd never fully gone under. Her eyes opened, alert, searching. "I'm here," he said quickly. She sat up, relief flickering across her face before she could stop it. "We're going to the hospital," Riker said. "To see your mom." Her breath caught. "Today?" "Yes." She nodded so hard her hair bounced. "Okay?" No smile, no cheers, just purpose. They rode the elevator down together. Marlowe stayed close, her small hand brushing the side of his coat without fully grabbing it. Outside, the air was cold and clean after the storm. As the car pulled into traffic, Marlowe stared out the window, quiet and focused. Riker glanced at her, then at the city waking up around them. He'd spent his life building systems to control risk. But this was different. This was choosing to stay in the middle of uncertainty because a 5-year-old had asked him not to disappear. And for the first time in years, Riker Ashford didn't feel like he was losing control. He felt like he was finally using it for the right thing. The hospital rose from the gray morning like something tired of fighting, concrete stained by time, windows dulled by years of breath and waiting, a place built to keep people alive but not always whole. As soon as they stepped inside, the smell hit Riker first. Disinfectant, metal, fatigue that lived in the walls. Marlo slowed, her small shoulders straightened the way children do when they know this place demands bravery. She walked half a step ahead of Riker now, not behind him. She knew this battlefield. At the front desk, a woman glanced up, eyes flicking from Riker's tailored coat to Marlo's borrowed clothes. "We're here to see Alara Wren," Riker said calmly. The receptionist's fingers paused over the keyboard. "ICU visits are restricted this hour." "She's her daughter," Riker replied. The woman hesitated. Then recognition dawned. "Oh, you're the little one from last night." Marlo nodded, silent. "Room 204, the receptionist said more gently. "Second floor, blue elevators." They walked past faded posters and flickering lights. Riker had toured private hospitals with art on the walls and coffee bars in the lobby. This place whispered survival, not comfort. The ICU hummed. Machines breathed where people couldn't. Footsteps softened. Voices dropped to reverent murmurs. Marlo stopped outside the room. Her fingers curled into Riker's coat, not gripping, just touching, grounding herself. "I need 1 second," she whispered. Riker waited. Then she stepped inside. Alara lay still beneath white sheets. Too still. Tubes ran from her arms. A monitor traced her heartbeat with cold precision. Oxygen hissed softly at her nose. Marlo climbed onto the small plastic stool without being asked. She reached out and brushed her mother's hair back, careful not to disturb anything. "She doesn't like it when it's messy," Marlo said quietly. Riker swallowed hard. "She hasn't smiled," Marlo continued. "Not for a long time." The sentence wasn't sad. It was factual. Riker stood there, useless hands at his sides, watching a 5-year-old carry more weight than any child should. A nurse entered, clipboard in hand. She froze when she saw Marlo. "You're back," she said softly. Marlo nodded. The nurse looked at Riker. "Are you family?" "No," Riker said. "But I'm here." The nurse studied him, his posture, his calm, the way Marlo didn't pull away from him. Something shifted in her eyes. "Then you should hear this," she said. The nurse introduced herself as Inez, 60-something. Sharp eyes, gentle hands that had seen too much to lie. She lowered her voice as she spoke. "Your mother's condition is critical," she said to Marlo, kneeling slightly to meet her eye level. "She has a severe infection in her heart." Marlo didn't blink. She just listened. "Endocarditis," Inez continued, glancing at Riker. "Antibiotics aren't enough anymore. The infection's aggressive." Riker felt the word anymore echo in his chest. "What does that mean?" he asked. Inez exhaled. "It means she needs advanced intervention. Cardiac specialists, possibly surgery." Hope sparked, then dimmed, but Inez added carefully, choosing her words. "This is a public facility. We don't have the resources for that level of care." Riker's jaw tightened. "So transfer her." Inez hesitated. "She has no insurance, no coverage on file, no next of kin with financial means." The sentence landed like a gavel. Marlo's fingers tightened around her mother's hand. "Is she going to die?" The question cut through the room, clean and merciless. Inez paused. "We're doing everything we can." It wasn't an answer. Riker stepped forward. "What hospital can treat her?" Inez looked at him, surprised. "St. Aurelia Heart Center, best in the state." "Send her file," Riker said immediately. Inez blinked. "Sir, now." There was no anger in his voice. No raised volume, just authority. Inez studied him again. This time something clicked. Ashford, she said slowly. As in Ashford Systems. Riker nodded once. The air changed. Inez straightened. I'll notify administration. Riker was already pulling out his phone. Arrange a private transfer, cardiac team on standby. I want her moved within 2 hours. Mr. Ashford, Inez said carefully. That will cost, I'll cover everything. Marlowe looked up at him, eyes wide, uncertain. You don't have to. Riker knelt beside her. Yes, he said gently. I do. She searched his face, trying to understand a world where doors opened instead of slammed shut. Inez cleared her throat. I'll keep her stable until transport arrives. She turned to leave, then paused. You're doing a good thing. Riker didn't respond. He was watching Marlowe, who hadn't let go of her mother's hand once. Power had never felt this heavy. The room fell quiet again. Machines hummed. The heart monitor traced its steady, fragile line. Riker moved to the small counter beside the bed, where paperwork lay stacked and untouched. Among it sat a faded photograph of Ilara and Marlowe in front of a fountain, both smiling, sunlit, and unaware of the future. Riker picked it up carefully. He reached into his pocket and pulled out another business card. On the blank back, he wrote slowly, deliberately, You're not alone. She isn't either. He placed the card beside the photo. Marlowe noticed. She didn't ask what it said. She just looked at it like it belonged there. I'm not here as a CEO, Riker said quietly. I'm here because I'm staying. Marlowe nodded once. That was enough. Minutes passed, then more. Riker pulled a chair close and sat beside Marlowe. He didn't check his phone, didn't rush. He matched her stillness. Eventually, her head leaned just barely against his arm, not asking, trusting. Riker didn't move. The weight of it startled him. How something so small could feel so significant, like a door opening in a place he didn't know still existed. Outside the room, arrangements unfolded at speed. Calls were made. Paperwork flew, systems bent. Inside, nothing changed. Marlowe traced the edge of the hospital sheet with her finger. Mom doesn't like being alone, she said softly. Riker's throat tightened. Neither do I. She glanced at him. You do now. He shook his head. Not anymore. When the transport team arrived, Riker stood first, helping gather Marlowe's things. He crouched in front of her near the door. You can ride with her in the ambulance, he said. I'll be right behind you. Her eyes searched his. Promise. Riker didn't smile. Didn't joke. I promise. The doors closed behind them. As the stretcher rolled away, Riker stood alone in the hallway, the hum of fluorescent lights overhead. He pulled the photograph back from the counter and tucked it into his coat. This wasn't charity. This wasn't an impulse. This was a line crossed, and there was no turning back. The ambulance bay smelled like wet concrete and electricity. Red lights flashed against the gray morning, painting the walls with urgency. Paramedics moved with fast, practiced precision as Ilara's stretcher was guided into place. Monitors beeped. Oxygen hissed. Everything sounded louder when hope was involved. Marlowe stood frozen near the doors, her small backpack clutched tight against her chest. Riker crouched in front of her, bringing himself eye level. You ready? She nodded. Her lips were pressed together, holding something back. They're going to help her, he said. You'll ride with her. I'll be right behind. Marlowe glanced at the ambulance, then back at him. You won't get lost. The question cut deeper than it should have. Riker shook his head. I don't get lost, he said gently. Not from you. That seemed to satisfy her. She climbed into the ambulance, never letting go of her mother's hand. The doors slammed shut. Sirens ignited sharp and unforgiving. Riker stood there as the vehicle pulled away, lights disappearing into the thinning rain. For the first time, he felt the full weight of what he'd done. This wasn't a check he could write and forget. This was a promise moving at 70 miles an hour through traffic. His phone buzzed. Tessa Vale transfer confirmed. St. Aurelia is prepared. Cardiac team standing by. Riker typed back with hands steadier than he felt. Good. I'm on my way. The city blurred past as his car followed the ambulance. Chicago woke around him, coffee shops opening, people heading to work, lives continuing uninterrupted. None of them knew a 5-year-old was racing toward a second chance. When Riker arrived at St. Aurelia Heart Center, the ambulance was already unloading. The building gleamed glass steel light. It looked like a place where people believed in tomorrow. Marlo spotted him immediately. You came, she said. I said I would. Her shoulders relaxed just a little. As Ilara was wheeled inside, Marlo walked beside her, small legs moving fast to keep up. Riker stayed on the other side, flanking them like a quiet guard. This was no longer about control. This was about staying in formation. St. Aurelia's ICU was quieter, cleaner, softer. Machines hummed with a different confidence here, like they expected to win. Ilara was taken behind sliding doors. Doctors spoke in low, focused tones. Marlo was guided to a waiting room filled with pale green chairs and a wide window overlooking the city. She climbed onto one and pulled a folded piece of paper from her backpack. Riker noticed it was the same one she'd shown him earlier, the drawing with the 3 figures. She stared at it for a long moment, then pulled out a worn purple crayon. What are you doing? Riker asked gently. Fixing it, she said. She turned the paper over and began to draw again. Slow, careful, intentional. Riker watched in silence as shapes formed. Boxes, squares, lines, windows. 3 at first. Then she paused, frowned, and added a 4th. What's that one? Riker asked. Marlo didn't look up. That one's for later. She shaded the windows in different colors. Purple, green, blue, yellow. Each one's a room, she explained quietly. So no one's stuck. Riker felt his chest tighten. And who lives in them? Marlo pointed. Mom? Me? She hesitated, then tapped another. You? Riker inhaled slowly. And the last one, he asked. Marlo shrugged. It's empty, in case someone needs it. The doors slid open. A nurse stepped out. She's in surgery prep. It'll be a few hours? Marlo nodded. No tears, just resolve. They waited. Time stretched. Coffee went cold. Noon came and went. At some point, Marlo's head tilted against Riker's arm as she continued to color. He didn't move. When her crayon slipped from her fingers, he gently picked it up and placed it back in her hand. Why are you helping us? She asked suddenly. Riker thought for a long moment. Because someone once didn't help me, he said. And I promised myself I wouldn't be that person. She considered that, then added a small sun above the windows. That's good, she said. The sun means people can see you. Riker smiled for the first time that day. It was nearly evening when the surgeon finally appeared. Riker stood immediately. Marlo slid off her chair, heart pounding. The doctor removed his mask, exhaustion etched into his face, but there was something else there too. We were able to intervene, he said. It was serious, but she's stable. Marlo froze. Stable is good, the doctor nodded. Stable is very good. She exhaled a breath she'd been holding for days. She's not awake yet, the doctor continued. But her vitals are stronger, the infection's under control. Marlo looked at Riker, eyes shining. She's trying. Yes, Riker said softly. She is. They were allowed into the room briefly. Ilara lay pale but calmer, her breathing deeper, more even. The machines no longer screamed urgency. They whispered patience. Marlo approached slowly, reverently. She took her mother's hand and held it with both of hers. I stayed, she whispered. Just like I said. Riker watched the monitor. The steady rhythm felt like a miracle earned inch by inch. Marlowe turned to him. You stayed too. Riker nodded. I will. She reached into her backpack and pulled out the drawing again, the windows, the sun, the empty space. She placed it gently on the table beside the bed. So she knows where to come back to, Marlowe said. Riker swallowed hard. As they stepped back into the hallway, the weight shifted. The future was still uncertain. Recovery would be long. Nothing was guaranteed. But for the first time since that stormy night, hope wasn't an idea. It was breathing. The first sign was not a sound. It was a change in rhythm. Riker noticed it. Before anyone else, the heart monitor's line smoothing out the rise and fall of Ilara's chest, becoming deeper, steadier. Not dramatic, not sudden, just different. Like a storm easing without warning. Marlowe was sitting on the edge of the chair legs tucked beneath her fingers, laced tightly together. She hadn't moved in nearly an hour. Then Ilara's eyelids fluttered. Once. Twice. Marlowe inhaled sharply. Mom Riker stood at the same time, heart pounding in his ears. The nurse stepped in, eyes widening. She checked the monitor, then Ilara's pupils. Ilara, the nurse, said gently, Can you hear me? Ilara's brow creased as if the world was too bright, too loud. Her lips moved, no sound at first. Then barely audible, Marlowe. The name broke the room. Marlowe climbed onto the side of the bed, carefully mindful of tubes and wires, and pressed her forehead to her mother's shoulder. I'm here, she whispered, voice shaking. I stayed. Ilara's hand twitched. Slowly, with effort, her fingers brushed through Marlowe's hair. The motion was weak, but deliberate an answer. Tears slid down Marlowe's cheeks, silent and unstoppable. The nurse smiled, already stepping back to give them space. She's waking up, she said softly. It's a good sign. Ilara's eyes shifted, unfocused at first, then found Riker standing near the foot of the bed. She stared at him, confusion creasing her face. Who? Her voice rasped like paper. Riker took a slow step forward. I'm Riker, he said. Your daughter and I met during the storm. Ilara swallowed. Why are you? Here, he didn't reach for practiced words, didn't hide behind explanations. Because she asked me to stay, he said simply. Ilara's gaze softened. A tear slid from the corner of her eye. She closed her eyes briefly, then opened them again, stronger this time. Thank you, she whispered. Riker shook his head. You don't owe me anything. Marlowe looked between them, eyes wide as if trying to memorize the moment. Outside the room, the hospital hummed on. Inside, something irreversible had begun. The days that followed settled into a rhythm Riker had never known. Morning rounds, soft conversations. The quiet beeping of machines that no longer sounded like alarms. Ilara drifted in and out of sleep, growing stronger by inches. Marlowe stayed close, always within arm's reach, like a lighthouse refusing to dim. Riker came early and left late. He brought juice boxes, coloring books, a small stuffed rabbit he found at the hospital gift shop. Marlowe named it Storm, without explanation. She sleeps better when you're here, a nurse told him one afternoon. Riker nodded, unsure how to respond. He only knew it felt true. One evening, as the light faded to violet outside the window, Ilara watched Riker helping Marlowe tape a new drawing to the wall beside the monitor. 4 windows this time. Mom, Marlowe said, pointing. Me. Riker. She hesitated, then tapped the last one. Us. Ilara's eyes filled. She reached for Riker's hand. He took it without thinking. You didn't have to do this, Ilara said quietly. We were managing. Riker met her gaze. You were surviving, he said. There's a difference. Silence stretched, not awkward, not heavy, honest. Later that night, after Marlowe had fallen asleep, curled in the chair, Ilara spoke again. She's afraid you'll disappear. Riker looked at the small rise and fall of Marlowe's chest. I'm afraid of that too, he admitted. But not of leaving, of failing her. Ilara squeezed his hand. Don't let her be alone again. Riker didn't answer out loud. He didn't need to. The promise settled into him not as words, but as direction. Outside, the city lights blinked on one by one. Inside, a family unfinished, unconventional began to take shape. The social worker arrived on a Thursday. Calder Rowe, mid-40s, calm eyes, burgundy tie. He spoke carefully, respectfully, as if every word carried weight. You've been caring for Marlowe, he said to Riker, glancing at the file. Arranged medical transfer. Covered expenses. Provided stability. Yes, Riker replied. And you're requesting temporary guardianship while her mother recovers. I am. Calder studied him. May I ask why Riker thought of the bus stop, the storm, the question at bedtime? Because she looks for me in a room full of strangers, he said, and because she deserves someone who stays. Calder nodded slowly. We'll begin the process. That afternoon, Riker brought Marlowe to his other house, smaller, warmer, near the lake. Wooden floors that creaked. A bedroom that had once stored forgotten things now waiting to be claimed. Marlowe stepped inside, eyes wide. Can I make it mine? It already is, Riker said. By evening, glow-in-the-dark stars dotted the ceiling. Drawings covered one wall. 4 windows appeared again and again. They sat on the porch after dinner, wrapped in blankets, the air cool and clean. Will Mom come here? Marlowe asked. Yes, Riker said. When she's ready. Marlowe leaned against his shoulder. Then we'll all be in the same house. Riker felt something settle, quiet, solid, right. For years he'd believed home was something you built alone. Now he knew better. Home was where someone waited for you to come back. The day Ilara Wren was discharged, the hospital felt different. Not quieter, not brighter, lighter. She moved slowly, a cane in her right hand, each step careful, deliberate. Her body still bore the marks of battle, thin wrists, skin, pale strength borrowed from will alone, but her eyes were clear, awake, present. Marlowe stood beside her, gripping her mother's sleeve like an anchor. Riker walked a step behind them, not leading, not pushing, just there. Nurses waved as they passed. One slipped Marlowe a small sticker shaped like a star. Another nodded at Riker with a smile that held respect instead of surprise. Outside, the air was crisp. The rain had finally gone. The drive to the house by the lake passed in silence, the good kind. Marlowe watched the trees blur past the window. Ilara closed her eyes, breathing in out like she was memorizing freedom. When they arrived, Ilara paused at the front door. Glow-in-the-dark stars still clung faintly to the windows from inside. A hand-drawn sign taped crookedly to the door read, "Welcome home." Letters, uneven glitter, smudged everywhere. Ilara's breath hitched. Riker opened the door and stepped aside. The house greeted them softly. Wooden floors, warm light. Crayon drawings on the wall windows, sons, flowers, names written in careful looping letters. Ilara lifted a trembling hand to her mouth. I don't know what to say, she whispered. You don't have to, Riker said. You're home. Marlowe pulled her forward, eager. That's my room, she pointed. And that's yours. And that's where Riker makes bad coffee. Riker huffed. It's not bad. It is, Marlowe insisted. Ilara laughed. It was quiet, real. The sound startled all 3 of them. They sat together at the kitchen table, later soup warming the air. Ilara watched Riker move around the space, careful but comfortable, like someone who'd learned a new language without realizing it. You saved us, Ilara said finally. Riker shook his head. No. She waited. She saved me first. He finished, glancing at Marlowe, who was busy coloring another house with 4 windows. Ilara followed his gaze, and she understood. Recovery was not a straight line. Some mornings, Ilara woke strong. Other days, the stairs felt impossible. Riker adjusted without comment, meetings, moved schedules, erased priorities, rewritten. Marlo adapted fastest. She drew every day. Houses, trees, windows, always windows. One afternoon, she burst into the living room holding a new piece of paper. "Don't look yet." Riker raised both hands in surrender. Ilara smiled from the couch. "Okay," Marlo said, finally spreading the paper on the table. Riker looked and felt his chest tighten. The house was there again. Same shape, same crooked roof. But this time there were 4 windows, each filled with color. Under them names: Mom, me, Riker, us. The curtains were drawn open. A yellow sun hovered overhead, bright and unapologetic. "I wanted one that belongs to everyone," Marlo said softly. "So even if we're in different rooms, we're still together." Riker knelt beside her, slowly, carefully. "You did that," he said. "You made a place." Marlo tilted her head. "Didn't we already?" Ilara wiped her eyes. "We did." That night the house settled into sleep. Marlo curled beneath her starry ceiling, clutching her stuffed rabbit. Ilara rested downstairs, breathing deep and steady. Riker stood in the hallway listening. The silence was no longer empty. Later, he sat beside Ilara on the couch, an old photo album open between them. A picture of his sister stared back, laughing, alive, gone too soon. "She would have loved her," Ilara said quietly. Riker nodded. "She would have." "Thank you," Ilara said again, not desperate this time, grounded. Riker shook his head once more. "This isn't something you thank someone for. This is something you keep." Outside, moonlight spilled across the windows. 4 panes, 1 house, and in every one of them the light was on. Summer arrived quietly in Chicago, as if it didn't want to disturb what had taken root. The air near the lake softened. Trees filled out. Mornings carried a warmth that felt earned rather than given. From the back porch of the house, Riker watched Marlo kneel in the grass, carefully watering a row of small pots she'd insisted on planting herself. "These ones are for Mom," she said, pointing to the tallest sprouts. "And these?" Riker asked. She grinned. "Those are for us." Ilara stood nearby, leaning lightly on her cane, stronger now. Still healing, but visibly here. She watched her daughter with a look Riker recognized instantly, not fear anymore, not vigilance, but relief. It had been 7 weeks since the ICU. 7 weeks since a storm, a bus stop, and a child too small to be brave had asked him not to disappear. Life didn't turn into a movie montage after that. There were physical therapy appointments, insurance paperwork, bad days when Ilara needed to lie down before noon. Nights when Marlo woke from dreams where sirens screamed again. But there was also routine. Breakfasts that ended in spilled juice and laughter. Drawings taped over the fridge. 2 mugs in the sink instead of 1. A tiny toothbrush beside his in the bathroom. Riker still ran a company. He still made decisions that moved money and people and systems. But something fundamental had shifted. He no longer measured days by output. He measured them by presence. One evening, as the sun sank low and painted the lake gold, Riker found Marlo sitting at the kitchen table with crayons spread everywhere. She was unusually quiet. "What are you making?" he asked. She didn't look up. Something important. When she finally slid the paper across the table, Riker felt the breath leave his chest. It was the house again. But this time it was different. The 4 windows were still there. Mom, me, Riker, us. Only now inside each window she'd drawn light. Not just yellow scribbles, but lines stretching outward, touching each other, overlapping. "What's that?" Riker asked, his voice unsteady. Marlo shrugged. "So the dark doesn't know where to go." Ilara stepped closer, one hand resting on Riker's arm. She stared at the drawing for a long time. "She used to be afraid of the dark," Ilara said softly. "Every night." Riker swallowed. "What changed?" Ilara smiled, eyes wet but calm. "She knows someone will come if she calls." Later that night, after Marlo was asleep beneath her starry ceiling, Riker stood in the hallway and listened. No sirens, no rain, just breathing. Ilara joined him quietly. "You know," she said, "you didn't just save our lives." Riker shook his head, the old reflex still there. You stayed," she interrupted gently. "Most people help once. Very few stay." Riker looked toward Marlo's door, slightly open, light spilling out into the hall. "I used to think staying was dangerous," he admitted. "Like if you care long enough, something gets taken." Ilara nodded. "Sometimes it does." They stood there, letting the truth exist without fear. "But sometimes," she added, "you gain something that gives everything else meaning." Riker didn't answer. He didn't need to. The house settled around them, holding three lives that had arrived at each other by accident and stayed by choice. Outside, the moon climbed higher, its light spreading across the lake and into the windows. 4 panes of glass. 4 sources of light. One place where no one had to be alone again. And for the first time in his life, Riker Ashford knew this with certainty. Some promises aren't meant to be spoken. They're meant to be lived every single day. Did this story move you? Share your thoughts in the comments and rate this story from 1 to 10. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe to the channel, and click the bell icon so you don't miss other heartwarming stories. Click on the last screen to see the next emotional chapter waiting for you. See you in the next story.